Yo, Saturday is here, and with it comes another edition of the Cafe on Air podcast. I'm your host, Big Italy 42, talking here some NBA action. Had a interesting night last night. If you're checking out some headlines, you're noticing a lot of bench players and reserves and under-owned guys that kind of went off last night. We had Dion Waiters had a huge game. Anthony Morrow, another guy from OKC, while Russell Westbrook still had another triple-double. But we kind of already expected that. Dennis Schroeder, another big game. Michael Beasley had a huge game. Nikola Mirotic, big again. Couple injury concerns again. Tyreke Evans left with their listing as a calf injury, already dealing with an ankle injury. So definitely concerning for Tyreke Evans there. And David West left the game as well with a illness, so we'll see what's going on with his status tonight. So without further ado, a little bit of a recap there for you. I'm going to talk about some point spreads. We only have 5 games tonight. Not a pretty slate. Pretty ugly slate, if you ask me. Pretty concentrated values. I'll get to that in a minute. There's one game I'm mainly targeting, and I'm going to sprinkle in some guys elsewhere outside of GPPs. But that's going to be my main target. So either way, starting off here, Brooklyn at Indiana. Brooklyn coming off that triple overtime game last night. Brook Lopez had a monster game, 65 fantasy points. But got to assume they're tired. Now traveling to Indiana. 8.5-point favorite for the Pacers. 192-point total. Chicago at Detroit. Chicago is a 3.5-point favorite. 194.5-point total. Jimmy Butler did practice some this week. He did not play last game. He is officially questionable. Seems that he's more likely he comes back on Monday, but monitor that situation throughout the day. It is before noon Eastern time here, so definitely monitor that. Also monitor Greg Monroe. Doesn't look like he'll be back for this one either. He's listed as doubtful for this one. So definitely some fantasy goodness to be had in this one, and surprisingly, this is one of the better games on the slate. Portland at Memphis. Memphis a 3.5-point favorite, 193-point total. Only injury concern in this one is obviously Wesley Matthews still out. Phoenix at Houston. Houston listed at an 8.5-point favorite. This is the game you're going to want to target the most. 207-point total. Brandon Knight still listed as questionable/doubtful for this one. His status kind of up in the air. Doesn't seem that he'll be back tonight. Dwight Howard has been practicing. Obviously not expected back tonight either. Terrence Jones is out for, they say, at least 3 games with a partially collapsed lung. So get better there, Terrence, but that does open up some value for us. And Utah at Golden State. Utah, the defensive juggernaut of the NBA right now. 9-point underdogs, 194-point total there. So very low total for a Golden State game, but still not enough to go around for me. I'll get to that in a minute. Starting off here, I'm going to be talking DraftKings and FanDuel. And at point guard tonight, it is very, very thin. My top option, dollar for dollar here, is going to be Reggie Jackson. And this is obviously contingent on Greg Monroe sitting out, more spacing on the floor. He always plays better without Greg Monroe on the court since his time in Detroit. So if Greg Monroe sits, which it looks like he will, Reggie Jackson sitting at $7,400 and $6,900 on DraftKings makes for a great play tonight against a Chicago team that is a sieve against opposing point guards right now. Aaron Brooks, a terrible defender, can't seem to stop anything. So, love Reggie Jackson tonight at that price. Top option here, price-wise, I'm going to pay or stay away with Stephen Curry. I'm staying away. I'm not playing anyone against Utah. If there's a player that could dominate Utah, it is Steph Curry. I don't see it. I don't think it's necessary tonight. He's not playing big minutes anyway. 27, 30, 30, 27 over his last 4. He doesn't have to do a whole lot. I do think Golden State will still win this game, but Curry's not going to need to score 50 fantasy points for him to win this game. It's going to be an ugly battle. I'm staying away from this game almost completely. So for Curry, for me tonight, stay away. I'm going with him maybe in a single bullet in a tournament, but no way I'm paying up for him in cash games. Don't think it's necessary. Next up, at point guard, you've got Mike Conley in a fine matchup. You wonder about his minutes. He did only play 26 last night, 15.5 fantasy points, so he's more of a tournament play. Not really a guy I'm interested in tonight. I wouldn't blame you if you played him in a tournament, but just not a lot of upside there. A guy that is interesting to me who is coming off the bench, but last night saw 41 minutes to Darren Williams' 22. And obviously this is a mess you don't want involved with in your cash games, but Jarrett Jack had the much better game. $5,600 on FanDuel is a little pricey for me. I'm not a big fan there. But on DraftKings, sitting at a bargain bin price of 4.6K. So I like him as a tournament play there. Really don't like investing much in that entire situation there in that backcourt. But if I'm going one of the two, it's going to be Jarrett Jack, despite the big minutes last night. Trey Burke, I guess, in play for a tournament. I'm staying away. Patrick Beverley, really interesting play here. Never a sexy pick, but $4,700 on FanDuel, $4,500 on DraftKings. He's the guy that's probably going to get you right around 20 to 25 fantasy points. He plays mid to high 30s every night. And, you know, it's the highest total in the night. So if you can get a point guard playing the highest total of the night, despite the fact that James Harden is the primary ball handler, as we know, for Houston, not exactly a tough matchup for Patrick Beverley either. So maybe he gets himself some peripherals, doesn't necessarily need to score a whole lot, but I think he's your best value play tonight, considering, because the minutes are locked in, don't need a ton to pay off that tag. I like Patrick Beverley quite a bit here tonight. Outside of that, you can look at Damian Lillard, $8,200 on FanDuel, $7,600, a much better price there on DraftKings. Not an ideal matchup against Mike Conley, but I don't blame you for going with him. Not a lot of point guards with significant upside, and he's definitely one of them. It was the tale of two halves with he and LaMarcus Aldridge last night. Lillard dominated the first half. Aldridge dominated the second half. So those two guys, pretty much the only reliable options on that Portland team. And kind of hard to peg, but if I'm going with one of them, I'm going with LaMarcus Aldridge. He is just impossible to cover right now. More on him in a few minutes. Shooting guard. I don't need to tell you that the top play on this slate is James Harden, and it is not close. $11,000 on FanDuel, $11,200 on DraftKings. We know what this man's capable of. He's one of the front runners for MVP. I think he should win it. Currently listed third in odds. I mean, that's another argument for another time. James Harden's my MVP. So, coming off of somehow his best performance of his career, points-wise, 50 points, I'm going to count me as one of the few people surprised that he's never scored 50 points. But 66 fantasy points in that one in 40 minutes. The guy is an absolute machine. He has that sort of upside every single game. And only 4 assists in that one. So, this fast-paced game, you think he's probably going to get more assists here. I mean, he's got a similar ceiling in this one. We know his floor. A bad game for James Harden is in the mid-30s here. So, safe play. You hope he pays off his tag, but if he goes off and you don't have him tonight, you are in a world of trouble with only 4 games I'm actually targeting. I will be having a ton of James Harden. Not to mention how weak the shooting guard position is. Jimmy Butler, like I said, not expected back tonight. Could play. I'd say even if he does, he doesn't see a lot of minutes, so that's a pass for me. Eric Bledsoe, the B option here, $8,300 on FanDuel and $8,100 on DraftKings. So he makes for a fine play with Brandon Knight supposed to be out again. Fast-paced games where he excels. We know he has triple-double upside as well. So look towards him, maybe getting those bonuses on DraftKings if you're looking that way. Rodney Stuckey, a little pricey for me. Really cooling off. I think he's fine in a tournament, but not a guy I'm actively targeting. Joe Johnson, getting up there in age, coming off of a fine performance last night in that triple overtime game, but 48 minutes played. So really not a route that I'm going to be taking tonight. I don't want to be targeting these older Nets players coming off of a triple overtime game. So no thanks for me. Assuming that Jimmy Butler sits, a lot of contingencies with him there, as you've noticed. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope makes for a fine punt at shooting guard. 24 and 31 fantasy points his last 2 games. He's a streaky player, but as you look at his recent production, his one really bad game against, guess who? The Utah Jazz. So if you're one of those game log searchers looking for some value, go ahead and just look past the Utah game logs. You can look past most of them, really. Each game is its own separate entity, and I do like KCP tonight as a punt. Really not many viable options at shooting guard, especially on FanDuel where you have to play 2. Tony Allen's going to be my other go-to. If you've been watching this show, you know he's my go-to cash game play. I think he's not a bad filler in tournaments, especially on a short slate tonight. The Grind Father, pretty much a lock for 30 to 35 minutes and 20 to 25 fantasy points. So at 4,700 there, you can get him on DraftKings at small forward, which is unfortunate tonight because there are more options there. But $4,500 there at small forward tonight. So the Grind Father certainly in play here. Moving a little bit further down, you could go with a guy like Tony Snell. Doesn't have much upside, so I'm not a big fan. He plays minutes, and that's what he's got going for him. That's really the only thing he's got going for him. I just cannot stand playing the guy. If you're looking for an all-risk, all-reward potential play, a very high-risk, high-reward, Jody Meeks, $3,900 on FanDuel, and over on DraftKings, $3,300. So short slate, you're going to need to try and differentiate yourself off of that Phoenix-Houston game a little bit. So I think you could do much worse than him as an ultimate punt play, but not a cash game guy for me. Small forward, top option, Gordon Hayward, $8,000 on FanDuel, $77 on DraftKings. And once again, I'm going with to pay or stay away here. And I like Gordon Hayward. I'm actually going to be playing some Gordon Hayward tonight. I don't know that he's necessary in cash because of some other cheaper options, but I will have some Gordon Hayward exposure in tournaments. Playing very well. Very good basketball. I mean, over his last 9 games, he has 6 games with 20 or more actual points scored. So we know he can kind of fill it up, and he obviously has the biggest upside of any player at small forward tonight, in my mind. So big fan of Gordon Hayward. Excuse me. Going down a little bit further, Nicholas Batum, still sitting at $6,900 on both sites. It was a struggle last night because he was in the ideal matchup against a team that gives up the most points against small forwards. Got himself off to a fast start, much like Damian Lillard did. It was almost like Nicholas Batum owned the first quarter, Damian Lillard owned the second, and the rest of the game was LaMarcus Aldridge. So I'm not shying away from Batum due to that. He can kind of fill it up, as we've seen. He's got, in his last 4 games, 2 games with double-digit rebounds, a game with double-digit assists. I mean, the guy can do it all, so you got to consider him on this 5-game slate. But my preferred play of choice, Trevor Ariza. If you've been playing DFS, you know that Trevor Ariza is your just consistent target. I mean, 30, 33, skip the Utah game, 32, 32, and 30 fantasy points his last 5 real outings. I don't count Utah games, as you know. So $5,900 for him on FanDuel, tremendous price. $6,300 on DraftKings. I don't mind paying that either. He's pretty much your safest play. He's got upside as well. Big fan of him tonight. You can also look at Corey Brewer, sitting at $5,500 at small forward on FanDuel, and he's at $52 at shooting guard on DraftKings. So he and Tony Allen kind of switched there. So can't decide. Go with one of those 2 guys. Obviously, Allen the cheaper play, but Brewer with the higher upside. Tony Allen the safer play. So do with that what you will. Jeff Green seems like a fine punt option. Nice cash game play. Should get you 20 to 25 fantasy points. I prefer him on FanDuel at $5K as opposed to $56 on DraftKings. I'd rather just pay a little bit on either side if I could and just get Trevor Ariza, but I don't blame you if you go Jeff Green. Go on cheaper if you want a tournament play, and this is a tournament play only despite his hot shooting over his last 2 games. Detroit's been tough against small forwards, and Mike Dunleavy, over his last 2 games, 21 real points, 21 real points, 32 and 30 fantasy points. He's a guy with a tremendously low floor. We're talking less than 10 fantasy points, but he does have that 30-plus fantasy point upside if he gets it going. So you can look at him in a tournament. Not a chance in hell I will be playing him in a single cash game. But like I said, 5 games tonight, only 4 that are really, really playable for me on both sides. So, I mean, really 3 if you take out the Brooklyn, Indiana game, which isn't exactly pretty in itself. So for me, I mean, you're going to have to take some chances in some tournaments. I don't mind Mike Dunleavy at that price, $4,200 FanDuel and $4,000 on DraftKings. Power forward, to pay or stay away for LaMarcus Aldridge, and I'm going to say, give me some LaMarcus Aldridge. $9,600 on FanDuel is a steep price, but if you're a bargain bin hunter, which I am myself, I always love a good deal. Go over to DraftKings, get him at $8,900. Not an ideal matchup against Memphis, but LaMarcus Aldridge is absolutely matchup proof right now. He's had some big games and tough matchups recently, and I expect him to continue to keep it going. I mean, his last couple games, 31 and 10, 34 and 12, 24 and 12, 24 and 10. He's on fire right now. He's a top option at power forward. I will be playing some LaMarcus Aldridge. Not a lot of big names you're really trying to pay up for at many positions, so really easy to get LaMarcus Aldridge in your lineups if that's how you want to go. If you want to pivot off of Aldridge with similar upside, You got Pau Gasol, $8,900 on FanDuel and $8,500 on DraftKings. His minutes are down a little bit. Obviously, they ran him into the ground earlier this season. And Taj Gibson is back. Only played 11 minutes last night. So you wonder if maybe he cuts in a little bit. Seems like Nikola Mirotic is the guy that you're going to want over Pau Gasol. Higher upside, certainly. So I think I'll take the discount with Mirotic, but I don't blame you if you go with Pau Gasol. Speaking of Nikola Mirotic, 7,000 on FanDuel, 72 on DraftKings. Still played 32 minutes despite Taj Gibson's return last night. And, man, is this guy phenomenal right now. 29, 25, and 27 real points over his last 3 games. He's absolutely tremendous. You really don't worry about him down low against this Detroit team who is all size and no defense down low in this front court. Love Nikola Mirotic tonight. He should be a popular play, and for very good reason. Another guy up top, if you're looking, Zach Randolph, 7,900 on FanDuel, 73 on DraftKings. I'm not in love with him, but he should get you right around 30 fantasy points for a nice cash game play. One of my favorite plays of the day, I'm getting to him here, Donatas Motiejunas, $5,600 on FanDuel, and on DraftKings, he's also $5,600. Going against Phoenix, who has struggled at times with power forwards this season. Going to be locked into big minutes here with Terrence Jones out for the next few games. Last game, just 7 real points, but 26 fantasy points. This is a guy that can contribute in multiple ways, so I love him as a cash game play tonight. I'll have him in some tournaments. He's, if you ask me, by far the best value option at power forward tonight. So get yourself some Motiejunas and sit back and rake it in. So as you notice, a lot of targets in that Phoenix-Houston game. Hard not to with that big total. Fastest paced game. In love with that game, really. If Brandon Knight sits out again, you can still look at Marcus Morris or even Markieff Morris. Markieff Morris, obviously, a play either way. But Marcus Morris been playing huge minutes, getting right around 23 to 28 fantasy points each game. He's sitting there at $5,200 on FanDuel and $5,300 on DraftKings. And Markieff at $6,900 on FanDuel, and on DraftKings he is $6,500. So neither one a must play, but if I'm going to choose one of the two, I'll probably go Marcus because it's a little bit cheaper. Similar type of floor for Markieff. Not quite the upside though. So don't think you can go wrong with either. Anthony Tolliver still a fine punt option if Greg Monroe sits. You don't love the matchup, but he's much better play on DraftKings. $4,900 on FanDuel, a little steep for me, but 38 on DraftKings is a nice discounted rate there. So I'm not digging deep here. Power forward, no need. Really not a lot of pricey guys. Like I said, you can pretty much fit whoever you want tonight. And that is the one blessing about this ugly slate. So moving over to center, Rudy Gobert. To pay or stay away from Rudy Gobert? I'm not saying I'm staying away, but I don't think it's completely necessary to have Rudy Gobert. It's not an elite matchup. Golden State, a fine defensive team. Like I said, I'm kind of staying away from this game. And it has nothing to do with Rudy Gobert's disappointing performance against the Lakers. Complete faith in him still. I think he's a fine play, but I think I prefer going with Marc Gasol at the same price on FanDuel. And over on DraftKings, you can actually get Gasol at a little bit of a discount from Rudy Gobert, $600 cheaper. So I prefer Gasol. Gobert's a fine guy to play. I think that Gasol probably has a little bit lower, a little bit less upside, but a little bit higher of a floor right now in a better matchup against Portland and Robin Lopez. So I'm going that route there. You can look at Andre Drummond in a tournament, but not for me really outside of a single bullet. Joakim Noah, $6,100 on DraftKings, $6,700 on FanDuel. Looks like he's capped at 32 minutes right now, but all he did in 32 minutes against Toronto was 8, 10, and 14 for 44 fantasy points. So big time upside with Joakim Noah. Don't mind him at all. If Alex Len does sit again tonight, which it looks like he might, Brandon Wright, don't need to tell you what he's been doing. He's been phenomenal, and he's sitting at $5,600 on FanDuel. The only bad thing about him on DraftKings is the fact that he's not a center. He's a power forward, listed at $5K. So you can go with him and Gasol. You can go with him and Rudy Gobert, whatever you want to do there. But he's available at power forward on DraftKings, which most nights I like. Tonight, not a big fan. I'd rather just go ahead and slot him in there at center. But, I mean, take advantage of these little nuances where you can. So maybe you like a center better. Maybe you wanted to go with an Andre Drummond Maybe you like a guy like Brook Lopez, despite the big minutes last night, coming off a huge game, confidence riding high. And I don't blame you for that. But either way, definitely some flexibility there, so keep that in mind. If Alex Lynn does go and doesn't have any minutes restrictions, I don't mind him at $4,400 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's a fine price as well at $47, but really not a guy that I'm going to be playing. I mean, if everything else fits fine, you know he's playing and they say no minutes restriction, I guess, but really not a guy that I'm chasing here. So with that said, that's going to wrap things up for this Saturday, and hope you guys all have a great weekend. Check out some great content we have at dailyfantasycafe.com. If you have any questions about tonight's slate and the other slate, any of our content, podcasts, things like that, I'm at Big Italy 42 on Twitter. Our Twitter account is at DFCafe. And I will see you all again on Monday. Check it out.